Well, I did it. I did what I said I would do, and I bought this and listened to the entire thing from beginning to end. My opinion is still mostly unchanged, but what I didn't realize when I bought this is that it actually has a third disc of bonus remix tracks that are pretty nice. So overall, I'd actually highly recommend picking this up and giving it a shot. It was definitely worth the money and worth the experience. I've been very torn over the course of this series as to whether or not I've oversold the difficulty of how to get into Fate. I've had some people that have approached me and said they have a hard time grasping the differences in character motivation and consistency between Fate Stay Night's main three routes, and then I've had other people that have said they got in with Grand Order and spent a few hours on YouTube and Netflix to watch the anime, and spent a few hours on the wiki reading up on stuff, and they're fully invested down the rabbit hole without a single complaint about overcomplexity or convolutedness. Around the time this series was coming out, Fate was starting to get a lot more mainstream attention. A lot of mainstream anime YouTubers making lowest common denominator content reeking with anti-intellectual hostility, saying things like even Fate fans don't know what's going on and the only reason you should watch is because the animation is pretty or that Rin is really hot. My assessment has been that the very argument that Fate is a confusing and convoluted rabbit hole to get into, in and of itself, makes it harder to get into. I think it's condescending to say that people can't just read up on the origins of the series online and you don't expect people to take that time to do that. And by saying that the series is so convoluted and confusing makes it more intimidating for people to approach. One of my big goals for this video series was to represent this franchise as approachable on the surface and deep and nuanced under the surface, and the decision of how deep you want it to go is entirely up to you. I hope I've made it perfectly clear about my anti-gatekeeping perspective throughout this series, and it shouldn't even need to be said how harmful that is to a community. It doesn't matter what you're into, if it's an anime, a video game, a sport, or even just like competitive quilting, I don't even care what it is. Representing your hobby as not for you is harmful. We should always be presenting the thing that we love and are passionate about as something we want to share with other people. And with that out of the way, let's get back to the story. In the movie, they go after Castor that very same night with Shiro following not far behind. Here in the series, Shiro goes home to sleep and has breakfast the next morning before deciding to go back on the chase. Rin, having been awake all night, falls asleep on a park bench where she has enough time alone with her thoughts and Archer's dream sharing to lucidly put together the entire picture of his backstory. Alright, just one more pin, I promise. We still have all the ones to get back to from part 1, and I haven't forgotten about those. All of that wasted time gave Castor a perfect opportunity to attack the church to attempt to kill Kirei and take the dormant Holy Grail. As we know from Fate Zero, Kirei is incredibly tenacious, but Castor thinks she's sealed the deal. She begins searching the entire church for the Grail, and Kuzuki expresses his concern for Castor acting on her own without his knowledge or involvement when seizing Saber and attacking the church. Saber is magically bound, while Castor attempts to sway her fully under the influence of the command seals. What Castor is doing here is sort of like playing dress-up with her doll, I guess you could say. Like, it's meant to demean and belittle them while they're under her control, and she does the same thing to Sakura in the Dean anime. I really like Carnal Phantasm's joke about this, though, because they essentially turn this into Medea having, like, a fangirl-like obsession with Saber, having a bunch of figures and merchandise and, like, a shrine dedicated to her, essentially turning her into an otaku hyperfan. Rin and Archer finally arrive to confront Castor, with Shiro trailing closely behind. Rin is surprisingly confident that with her magic she can go one-on-one with Castor, while Archer deals with Kuzuki. When it's his time to act, however, Archer does a heel turn and betrays Rin. He tells Castor that she has enough power on her side for him to reconsider joining her, and with that, she uses Rulebreaker and takes control over him as well. At least here in the series, he has a rationalization for convincing Castor to let Shiro and Rin leave alive, saying that he isn't fully under her control at this stage and would not obey her unless she lets them leave alive. In the film version, he just sort of says let them go after he's already had Rulebreaker used on him, and for some reason she does it, even though by the film's logic she would have no reason to do so. It's here that I wanted to bring up pin number 6, the reason why I feel like Rin saying that Archer's acting suspiciously is a bad line. I think it's a bad line because it telegraphs too strongly that Rin suspects he's up to no good and plans to betray her, which is something that the audience should absolutely not be suspicious about at this point, given the circumstances, unless they've played the visual novel or seen the movie.
Rin is flabbergasted that Shiro was brave and stupid enough to not only ignore her warnings, but to come all this way to fight anyway while still dealing with his injuries. She tells him he needs to go home and rest, but he reassures her that he's fine and they just need to regroup and figure out their next plan. She pushes back, insisting, "Dude, you literally have a hole through your shoulder. Were bedridden and unconscious a few hours ago, and you still tried fighting." And of course, being his typical self-sacrificing Shiro, he finally says, "You're hurting more than I am." And Rin finally has had enough and breaks down.
And now we get the iconic scene on the hill from the visual novel.
Rin reconciles with the thought that it was her own foolishness that cost her Archer's loyalty, and with no servant, her fight is essentially over. When she asks Shiro why he came back to save her, it's explained through visuals that he owed her one, as he passes the pendant back to her. The one thing that the scene manages to squeeze in here is the romance angle, where Shiro confesses his feelings to Rin and she swoons like crazy because of it. Something that is absent from the movie altogether due to its short runtime, and for the better. Most of episode 14, believe it or not, focuses on Medea's backstory and how her and Kuzuki found each other. This is what I was talking about when I said this series has some unexpected lore indulgence that even the hardcore fans were impressed to see. We see the mage who originally summoned Castor for this war, a man named Atrum Galeasta. He's a wealthy foreign man with a very young magic bloodline. He and his harem initially mock Castor and don't even really treat her as an actual person with individual agency. He shows her his alchemy lab where he's transmuting children into magic crystals. Medea scoffs at this pitiful waste of life and generates a massive crystal without so much as lifting a finger.
I've mentioned this a little bit before, but the way that Fate's magic system works means that the older the magic is, the more powerful it will be. The more lines of family that a mage has passed their magic down to, the more strong it becomes. Medea being a servant already means she's leagues beyond Atrum anyway, but she also happens to be from the Greek era, the time of the gods, meaning that she has especially powerful old magic that's kind of been lost to time.
Atrum tries to barter with Kirei that if he could get rid of Castor, he may still have a shot at the archer or saber slots in the war. He gives him a letter to give to Lancer's master, saying she can go ahead and kill off Castor. Of course, we the audience know that at this point, Bazette is already dead.
Lancer no master ni to kita ka. Servant mo servant nara, master mo master da na. Mattaku douyou ni un ga nai.
That line is funny for all the wrong reasons.
Atrum returns to find his lab completely destroyed by Castor. He tries to use his command seals to order her to kill herself, only to realize she's already used Rulebreaker on herself to break their pact. Atrum dies a bitter, fiery death. Castor nearly escapes death by the hands of Lancer, and is found by Kuzuki shortly after.
自分の故郷に帰りたかっただけなのに。
そこで何をしている?
When Shiro and Rin come home to regroup, they decide that the situation is so dire it might even be worth it to ask Illya and Berserker of all people for help. Illya is actually all for the idea of allowing the two of them access to her castle, because she wants to know more about Kiritsugu from Shiro. No sooner does she convince her maids of this, that they're greeted by another, much less welcome guest.
So, when Shinji asks Kirei for a new servant, he gives him the still-living Gilgamesh, and this is the first thing these two idiots decide to do for Shinji's second chance at victory.
Illya's maids try to fight off the intruders, but Gilgamesh effortlessly dispatches them. Berserker arrives seconds later to offer up a worthy challenge, and a fight between two demigods begins. Of course, we have to have a break in the middle of the fight to have a flashback about Illya. Her backstory is not only heartbreaking, it's downright horrifying. Not only did she have to move on with life without her parents, but the curse of the Grail taunts her in the form of her mother to inform her about the upcoming Fifth War, so she can try to get back at Kiritsugu out of spite. We see that Illya has been given the entire Einsburn line passed down of knowledge and magic, each generation of the family sort of vicariously living on inside her. Finally, we get to see her trials in summoning and mastering Berserker and the bond they developed.
I'm really glad they took the time to show us this, but if anything, all it's doing is just setting us up to like Illya more in Heaven's Feel, because as you're about to find out, this is actually the worst route for her. But it's her arc is what's important. She goes from being annoying in the Fate route to being sympathetic in this one, and then finally likable in Heaven's Feel.
Hercules is putting up a good fight, but no matter how many lives he has, Gilgamesh can keep just taking one after another after another. He's a big target, and Gil has a limitless supply of weapons tailor-made to kill heroes. Not to mention the Chains of Heaven are more effective against creatures with high divinity, meaning Hercules is exceptionally encumbered by them. After landing the final blow, Gil focuses on his true prize and kills Illya.
Here in the series, they do a really good job of giving Illya a very sad and tragic death. We know that Gilgamesh needs her heart for the Grail, and at least he has the decency to put her down easy. In the movie, he just reaches right in and rips her heart out, and it's horribly graphic and bloody, and even coming off the coattails of the annoying Illya from Dean that we resented so much, watching the movie we were just like, damn, was that really necessary? Good lord.
Shinji and Gil leave with Ilya's heart, and Shiro and Rin give her a proper burial. It's at this scene when Rin finally decides to relentlessly tear down Shiro's ideology in an attempt to get him to consider self-preservation instead of martyring himself to save people. The dialogue is done better here in the series due to script changes I mentioned in the film, but the film version has better atmosphere and music. Again, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but why would you have such an important character moment have no music?
But that's it, Shiro. All the more reason to value your life. Fortune spared you, it gave you a gift, and you have to respect that instead of throwing it away. Thousands of lives were lost except yours. It's time you wake up and realize you need to be grateful for what you have.
Shiro promises Rin that no matter what, choosing to live his life this way is not something that he's ever going to regret.
Well, it looks like the plan to recruit Berserker didn't work. Wouldn't it be convenient if the only other viable servant just happened to show up and offer help?
This series does at least explain what Lancer's motives and orders from his master are, as opposed to it being just pure convenience that he decides to help them. Lancer gets to show how truly charismatic he is on screen, as here in Limited Blade Works is the route where he gets the most screen time. Meanwhile, Archer is getting bored with pretending to keep watch, realizing it's all a facade to keep him under surveillance because Castor has eyes all over the church. He decides to have a conversation with Kuzuki, another great character moment not in the visual novel or other adaptations that gives us some insight on what kind of person Kuzuki is, and some vague glimpses of his backstory. I find it really ironic that this conversation takes place in the exact same room that Gilgamesh used to persuade Kirei in Fate Zero. Archer wants to know Kuzuki's moral alignment and ethical perspective. He may not telegraph it out loud, but he finds Kuzuki reprehensible, but still fascinating in his own way. He takes issue with Kuzuki comparing himself to mages for being an outcast from society, saying that even though the traditions of mages are cruel and ugly, the individual people still hold more genuine humanity than Kuzuki will ever be able to experience. Kuzuki's one glimmer of decency is his wish. He simply wants to support Castor in fulfilling her own wish. That is his only desire.
一つ聞き忘れていた。あんたが思う正しさとは何だ？
そうだな。たとえ自分の選択が間違いであったとしても、後悔はしないことだろう。善悪が等価に見える以上、それだけが私が良しとする人間らしさの証明だ。
With Lancer now in play, it's time for the counterattack. Lancer versus Archer, Shiro versus Kuzuki, and Rin versus Castor.
Let's start with the Lancer-Archer rematch. This is jumping ahead a bit, but Lancer is at odds with his objective here. He's actually under orders this time to kill Archer, but his soft spot for Rin is preventing him from wanting to go totally all out and finish him off. I mentioned this in their first fight, but they are definitely not evenly matched, and it really shows this time around as Lancer punishes him quickly and keeps him on the ropes. I already showed how some of the animation is really rough in the film version of this fight, but the pace and the flow of these three fights is maintained better in that version.
汚れなど成果で洗い流せる。そんな余分なプライドはな。
Lancer does what he couldn't do in their first fight and actually uses Gay Bolg. This time he throws it as a projectile, and Archer points out that this is an anti-army version of his Noble Phantasm. Archer has to call upon an ability we haven't seen from him up to this point, Ro Ias, a shield that manages to spare him from being destroyed by Gay Bolg. In the movie, he uses it and just shrugs off Gay Bolg like it's nothing. Here in the series, they acknowledge that the spear actually broke his shield, leaving him pretty badly damaged.
If Caster's game has been checkers, then Archer has been playing 4D chess with her this entire time. So there's something about the editing with this fight that just drives me crazy in the series. In the film, it cuts back and forth between the three fights just fine and escalates with the pace of the music, and the flow and continuity is preserved very well. In the series, we show Shiro's perspective where he sees a flash of white light and we hear a blood splatter. And then we just cut again to the same events from Rin's perspective. Now, if you look at the timestamp during the episode when this happens, and the fact that it cuts back to an establishing shot of the destroyed church, you can pretty clearly tell that this was because this was where they needed to fit the break for a commercial during the broadcast version of the show. However, storyboarding, animating, all of those things are done with the edit in mind. So it's my personal belief that not enough consideration was taken as to where this break needed to be. And so when you're rewatching it on streaming services like Netflix or on the Blu-ray version like I am, this just results in an incredibly jarring and awkward edit. Whereas the film does not have this problem because it plays continuously.
I mentioned earlier how old magic is always going to be better than new magic in Fate. So the question is, how is Rin, an exceptional but still modern mage, able to get the upper hand on Castor, an ancient Greek mage? Well, the simple answer is that in a traditional magic duel, Castor didn't account for being punched in the gut. Kuzuki intervenes just in time, and when it appears that our heroes have their backs to the wall, Archer finally plays his hand, raining hell down on both of them.
No, Soichiro, my love.
Castor.
Once again, point goes to the movie for having music to add emotional weight. Speaking of which, in the film they replicate the exact way that Kuzuki and Castor died in the Dean series from Gilgamesh, but in the Leadwork series, Kuzuki doesn't get hit. This allows a nice setup and payoff moment where Archer gets the satisfaction of putting an end to someone whose ideals disgust him, established by their previous conversation.
Now, I mentioned before how I didn't like the line where Rin says she feels like Archer is acting suspicious, and it's partially because she doesn't suspect him enough to do anything about it. And I think the reason for that is because he doesn't actually decide that he's going to fully turn his back on her until this moment.
元に戻ってシローと契約をし直せるでしょ?
At this point, he is so sick of Rin prioritizing Shiro over proper strategic decisions that he decides not only can he destroy Castor from within, Trojan horse style, but he can use it as an opportunity to punish Rin for her foolishness and also free him from his contract with her, allowing him to act on his own agency and kill Shiro. If Shiro's allowed to make a contract with Saber again, he's back exactly at square one.
With Castor out of the way, Shiro has an opportunity to rescue Saber, but it's broken up by Archer revealing his true agenda, to kill Shiro. Saber tries to stop him, but is incredibly weakened and has no master. Shiro takes Archer head on, but before Archer can kill him, Rin begins speaking the servant summoning incantation.
Now, in the film version, the framing of the shot keeps things ambiguous, where you can't tell if Rin is trying to make a new pact with Archer to get him to stop attacking Shiro, and it's meant to be a bit of a subversion of expectations when we see that she's actually making a contract with Saber. In the series, they remove all of that ambiguity, and we see Saber leap towards her, and it's pretty obvious what's going on. Now, here I wanted to talk a little bit about servant stat lines again, because certain servants can receive stat bonuses depending on how powerful their master is that's supplying them with mana. So Saber has a different stat distribution depending on if she's under the control of Shiro versus Kiritsugu. Here, under the control of Rin, Saber is more powerful than ever, meaning her stats are fully maxed out.
Archer realizes he's no match for a fully maxed out Saber. Still wanting to kill Shiro, he calls upon his noble Phantasm, the namesake of this route.
I am the bone of my soul.
やめろ、アーチャー。私はあなたとは。
Unknown to death, unknown to life, unlimited. Blade works!
If you watched my Dean review, you already know how Unlimited Blade Works functions, but the visuals for both the film and the series really sell quite well in both adaptations. Archer convinces Saber it's not worth trying to fight him here because he could just copy her Excalibur. Granted, he probably wouldn't survive the process, but it would be enough to kill Shiro and Rin as collateral. Already weakened from his fight with Lancer and after losing Castor, he doesn't have enough mana to realistically maintain the Reality Marble and decides on a backup plan. He kidnaps Rin and bargains with Shiro that she will be unharmed if he comes to the Einsburn Castle where they can have their decisive battle uninterrupted. I like how in the movie they put a lot of weighty emphasis on Shiro saying, "If you hurt her, I will kill you," since I feel like this is the moment that shifts Shiro from Fate Route Shiro to Limited Blade Works Shiro, the willingness to compromise on his ideals to achieve victory. Lancer continues to tag along because he has orders to ensure Rin's safety for reasons that will be explained soon, and with that, they set out after Archer.
Alright, it's finally time we got to Fate Stay Night's big twist. This changes the context of events that happen in all three routes, so full spoiler warning, this is a massive twist. I'll let the film go ahead and take it from here.
You and I had the exact same pendant. Which is odd, since there's only one that was ever created in the first place.
This is true, and being who you are, you carried it with you since it helped spare your life. A copy of it does not exist. It's an heirloom belonging to Rin's father.
I see. I know exactly who you are now. You're the epic spirit, Emiya. That is your true identity.
That's right. You heard correctly. Archer's true identity as a heroic spirit is none other than our protagonist, Shiro Emiya. I actually had to pause the movie when I was first showing this to Michelle so that she could take it in and come to that realization on her own and think about the implications of it. It's just such a mind-blowing twist, and I don't believe you if you said you saw it coming, because you didn't. You absolutely did not see this coming at all. But this does allow us to unpack a bunch of new things now, so let's go ahead and go back to those pins. Most of this has to do with Archer and his memory and not remembering what his legend is. So the question is he telling the truth, and does he regain his memory gradually over the course of the series? Or was he just lying and he had his memory from the beginning? This is one of those diegetic things that doesn't really matter to the story one way or another, but I would be willing to believe that Archer does not have his memory at the beginning of the Fate route, because we see him sort of regaining memories, and the Dean anime uses some visual shorthand in the Berserker fight where we see him remembering things like Sakura and Illya, and even referring to Illya by name in that scene. It's never actually stated in canon, but it's my personal belief that Archer has his memories from the very beginning here in the Unlimited Blade Works route. Alright, so pin number 1. His subtle expression change when he first lays eyes on Rin. I believe this is because he remembers Rin from his previous life, and due to his slight misogyny and also his affection for her, is why he discards her strategic value whatsoever and insists that he do all the fighting. This would also explain his oh shit reaction when he sees Saber at the end of that episode. Pin number 5. Archer's banter with Saber. Archer really shouldn't know who Saber is other than the fact that she's a knight, so for him to banter with her back and forth like that and tease her implies that he has a baseline for what her personality is like. Meaning, maybe he remembers being Shiro and being her master and what her personality was like. Not to mention, the series here takes it the extra mile, and Rin actually directly calls him out on that at the end of Season 1, saying, oh, you were being soft on her, and you must know her from a previous life. And for that matter, Archer has an uncanny ability to just spout off a servant's heroic identity without any establishing knowledge being shared. Cuckoo Lane, King Arthur, Princess Medea, he does this all the time, and it makes you think maybe he does have some prior knowledge of who they are, because pretty much as soon as he lays eyes on them, he knows who they are, even though no real information has been disclosed. Pin number 3, Archer saying that he has no wish to be granted because he already had his wish fulfilled when he was alive. He would have to remember what that wish was in order to know it was fulfilled, right? Therefore, he has his memory. Pin number 4, that line that was changed that I mentioned during the Ryudo Temple fight in the film version, it goes something like, and this is paraphrasing, but in the rough translation version, it was something like, hearing my own stupidity makes my head hurt. And that doesn't make any sense and is also kind of a spoiler, so I'm glad they changed it. Pin number 7, during Rin's dream sharing sequence, she fully explains to the audience what a counter guardian is in an explanation that we didn't think we would get in the series, nor have it explained in as much extraneous detail. Another nice treat for the fans. And finally, my favorite one, pin number 2. Archer claims that Rin summoned him poorly and improperly. As we know, to summon a servant you need some kind of totem or relic, something from their legend that the Grail can use to select the proper heroic spirit from the Throne of Heroes. When Rin performed the summoning, she thought she wasn't using a totem at all, but when in fact, she was. This totem was only ever going to summon Archer no matter what, because it is his totem, and she did not even realize it. She didn't fail to summon the saber through any inadequacy or ineptitude. You could say it was fate.
Lancer goes to find Rin, and Saber stays behind because she wishes to witness this battle. I honestly think this is kind of silly of Saber, and she could have created a different outcome if she'd actually gone to help Lancer. Shinji and Gil have been watching from the shadows, and while Archer is occupied, Shinji sees this as a perfect opportunity to prey on Rin. Lancer, having none of this, launches him across the room with an incredibly cathartic and satisfying punch.
Ah? 悪いなガキ。口より先に手が出ちまった。
We're then treated to the appearance of Lancer's master, the still-living Kirei. He is displeased that Lancer not only failed to kill Archer, but now stands in the way of Kirei taking Rin for him to use as the vessel for the Grail. Kirei realizes Lancer now poses more of a problem than he's worth, and orders him to kill himself with a command seal. Seems like a reoccurring problem for Lancers in this franchise. Lancer manages to survive long enough after being impaled, not only to kill Kirei in return, but to also ward off Shinji once again and untie Rin. He starts a fire with some basic magic, and Rin makes her escape.
さよならランサ。短い間だったけど、私もあなたみたいな人は好きよ。
I've been anxiously awaiting talking about this line. So, in the film version, during this scene, Shiro says to Rin in the original Japanese translation, "I like people like you." Then later, when Lancer frees Rin, she says that again back to him, not only to show her appreciation, but as a callback to that previous line. These lines are changed yet again here in the dub, and it's just weird to hear Rin say, "You are my type." I mean, the implication is not supposed to be that Rin is flirting back with him, it's supposed to be Lancer taking her words one step further than what she intended. But here in the series, they do keep the original translation, and it works as intended. A lot of people in the fan base apparently really like Rin and Lancer as a pairing, and I'm not opposed to it either, but it's not my preference, although they do get their opportunity in Fate Extra. I mentioned this in the previous video, but not everything that is set up is paid off in every single route, and even though it is really disappointing to see Kirei die early here, knowing that he has such huge plans, the Fate route and the Heaven's Feel route do a perfectly good job of fulfilling those promises with Kirei, and those two routes are not going anywhere. We just have to remember that here in this story in Limited Blade Works is not his route or the route to explore those concepts.
Throughout Throughout the series, they keep giving us these little glimpses of Archer's backstory without really going into full detail until we have all the pieces, so I waited until this moment to really talk about it. Shiro did grow up to be the hero of justice that he strived to be. He made a contract with the Counterforce to become a guardian for the world. He fought hard to end a major war, but in an ironic twist, was branded the mastermind of said war and was executed. In death, he began his sentence as a counter-guardian, being summoned to various different places and times throughout history to tip the scale slightly in mankind's favor. Essentially, he was forced to perform the very acts that the Grail hypothetically proposed to Kiritsugu, always killing people on the lighter side of the scale to save the majority. He believes by killing Shiro he can create a time paradox that will stop himself from ever making the contract to become a counter-guardian. That way he can finally be at peace rather than be an immortal death machine that exists outside of time, doomed to kill for all of eternity. Their fight rages on, Shiro unable to keep up with Archer's stronger projections. But worse are his words. Archer calls him a hypocrite, trying to live his life on borrowed ideals not even his own.
多くのものを失ったように見える。
それは違う。何も失わないように意地を張ったから、私はここにいる。何も失ったものはない。
And I feel like this is the major change in Shiro's ideology from the Fate route to the Unlimited Blade Works route. Fate Shiro was stubborn and unwilling to compromise on anything. Here, in the face of this revelation, Shiro understands that he must make sacrifices in order to make his dream come true. It's like the very act of Archer trying to tear him down and convince him to quit is giving him the perspective and the understanding to understand what he needs to commit and sacrifice in order to overcome the things that Archer says will break him. Archer is unintentionally making a better Shiro that is more prepared and understands the kinds of things he's going to have to face as a consequence of deciding to live his life this way.
Each time their swords clash, a bit more of Shiro's potential unlocks. His power becomes closer to Archer's each time since he's coming in contact with his own magic circuits in a more powerful state. Archer has had plenty of opportunities to deliver the final blow, but the thing that's holding him back is not Shiro's abilities, but his resolve and conviction. Archer is finally convinced that it's going to be alright, and Shiro is going to continue on his path no matter what lies at the end of the road. He is determined to never once feel any regret for living his life this way. And with that, Shiro finally strikes, and their fight is over.
There's so much to unpack about this ideological conflict between Shiro and Archer that I'm still not even sure I fully have a handle on it. And even though this is the big character moment for Shiro, we still have a whole other route to go. I have to say as well that I really enjoyed this fight in the movie version as well. I like that the pace and the tempo is much more fast and it keeps up with itself really well. I like how they're fighting and arguing at the same time. And as I said before, Liam O'Brien's performance is just incredible. The only thing about the film version of the fight that doesn't hold up very well is the fact that they don't really explain how Shiro, just an average dude, can keep up with a servant. They just say something to the degree of, oh, the winner takes control of Unlimited Blade Works, which again, makes no sense. I also wanted to take this moment to talk about Shiro and Archer's theme song, simply called Emiya. It's an awesome theme that everybody in the fan base seems to love and adore, and every time there's a new adaptation, we always look forward to a new iteration of Emiya. The version here for this series is excellent. It works as sort of the climactic crescendo they were going for with this scene, although it's not my favorite across all of the Fate works.
Another thing worth pointing out is that the movie doesn't make any mention of Avalon at all whatsoever. I guess it was a good thing that Saber stayed behind to watch the fight, because Avalon was essential to not only Shiro surviving, but also reminding Archer of why they're here. I'm sure Rin was excited about a happy reunion with all of them where Archer can stay and help them win, and they'll all get along. Too bad some golden asshole had to show up and ruin it. Gil's target was actually Shiro, but Archer commits one more act of redemption and jumps in the way, telling Shiro he's the only one who can defeat Gil. And with that, Archer disappears. With Kirei gone, Gil has to be the one to explain to our heroes about the wicked nature of the Grail, and by extension, his plans for it. He thinks, they're just Isn't enough civilization ending catastrophes in this era like there were in ancient times? Let's cause some chaos and destruction, and whichever humans survive are strong and tenacious enough to be my subjects. He spends so much time rattling on that the fire spreads throughout the castle, causing him to swiftly leave to prepare the Grail. Without Rin in his grasp, he has no choice but to use Shinji as the vessel, and the gruesome transformation begins. Our heroes regroup to prepare for the final battle. They determine that Saber won't be a good match for Gilgamesh because of the types of abilities he has that allowed him to effortlessly beat Berserker. They determine that if Shiro could master the reality marble that is Unlimited Blade Works, he might have the ability to match Gil in a fight. Only problem is he doesn't have nearly enough mana to achieve that.
Ah yes, I bet you were wondering how we've been able to get through 90% of the story and not had a hentai scene yet.
Yes, in the visual novel, this is the hentai scene from the Unlimited Blade Works route. Shiro and Rin have sex to create enough synergy to transfer her family magic crest onto him, giving him access to her massive reserves of mana from the Tosaka lineage. In the movie, they replaced the sex not with CGI dragons this time, but CGI dolphins! How does the series handle this?
The scene is exactly the same. I don't even care anymore. I'm just looking forward to getting it out of the way. We won't get proper censored hentai scenes until the Heaven's Feel movies, and we'll talk about those when we get to it.
To the series' credit, during the glimpse into Rin's memories, it does show us a new scene for the first time Rin ever saw Shiro, a personally very significant memory for her. Saber takes one last look around Shiro's compound, reflecting back on their experiences together. This is meant to be her capstone on her ideological journey from Fate Zero until now. I appreciate them putting this in the series, but it felt very sad and unfulfilling. That's another moment I had to remind myself that this isn't her route, and the Fate route will always be there to give us that proper closure to Saber's story. Rin tells Shiro that because she's supplying him with mana as well, Saber will not survive using Excalibur, meaning that her final task will be to use it on the Grail to destroy it. This detail is also omitted from the film version, so when Saber does this and she disappears out of nowhere, leaving the audience a bit confused. They set out for the Ryudo Temple, where Gil is already in the process of calling forth the Grail. They find it right away, and Gil soon intercepts them. Saber isn't following behind because she was stopped at the gate by the still-living assassin. Much like in the Fate route, Assassin knows he won't live to see the dawn. His only desire is to have an honorable duel between swordsmen, to which Saber indulges him. Rin goes into the lake to retrieve Shinji from the Grail, and Shiro fends off Gilgamesh. Gil is merely toying with Shiro for amusement, since he could easily destroy him if he took the fight seriously. Shiro taps into his new powers and manages to start copying Gil's weapons from the Gate of Babylon as they appear one after another. When Rin frees Shinji, the Grail tries to absorb a new vessel and goes after Gil since he has the highest mana. He doesn't hesitate to draw Ea and destroy the giant hand reaching for him in an impressive display of power, which unfortunately leaves Shiro lying in a heap.
Yuki, 美しい小鳥だと思ったのだが、その実、獅子の類であった。
After defeating Assassin, Saber arrives just in time to protect Shiro from certain death. After Shiro gets to his feet, he tells Saber she needs to move forward to take out the Grail, displaying absolute certainty that he can defeat Gilgamesh on his own.
I also mentioned in the previous video how Nasu is really not afraid to change character motivations between arcs, and that remains true here. You may notice that Gilgamesh's objective has changed quite a bit from the Fate route, where he primarily just wanted to marry Saber. That plotline is essentially discarded altogether in Unlimited Blade Works, and he's focused more on winning the Grail and using it to subjugate mankind. This isn't a mistake, it's just an intentional change in direction. Huge credit to Zero for accounting for all of these different possibilities and setting them up with equal plausibility.
As my final comparison to the film, I really do like this final fight in the movie as well. It continues Dean's tradition of trying to copy certain shots from the visual novel, and it's paced very similarly to the series. Shiro manages to conjure up Unlimited Blade Works, and it's able to keep Gilgamesh on the ropes. Gil finally admitting he's forcing to go all out. Another minor credit to the soundtrack here, they do include some new renditions of songs from the original visual novel soundtrack, once here in this fight with Gil, and again in the credits for the series at the end of the final episode. When Saber arrives, she can't get to Rin and Shinji due to the cursed mud having extremely adverse effect on servants. The gruesome disfigured Grail twists and warps, trapping Rin and Shinji deeper inside. Rin gives in and orders Saber with a command seal to destroy it, doing what must be done even if her and Shinji die in the process. But right when she's given up hope, she hears a familiar voice.
そのような泣き言聞く耳持たん。
最後の魔力あなたに託す。だからあんな聖杯。
Once they're clear, Saber unleashes Excalibur, completely obliterating the Grail, and disappears at peace when she's done. Shiro is giving it absolutely everything he has against Gil, that kind of unbridled, unwavering determination that convinced Archer of his dedication. When Gil seems desperate enough to call upon Aya, Shiro finally lands a clean strike and takes his arm clean off. Gil admits defeat, but with no mana left, Shiro is now vulnerable. Suddenly, the incomplete Grail opens up one more portal just to drag Gil back in with it. Gil tries to take Shiro in with him, and just when Shiro thinks he'll have to cut off his own arm to escape, he hears a familiar voice.
What you say? That you only meant well, well.
This smug bastard survived long enough with no mana and critical injuries to show back up at the end and save our heroes one last time. Incredible. Rin chases him down to convince him to stay, but he's finally at peace and ready to rest.
Rin, 私を頼む。知っての通り、頼りないやつだからな。君が支えてやってくれ。
They say their goodbyes, and he disappears.
I'm not going to talk about the epilogue episode or the alternate ending that shows the good ending for Unlimited Blade Works where Saber stays and it's a big bi-poly relationship and everybody's happy. Both of those are awesome and you should definitely give them a watch. I found myself really enjoying this particular viewing of the series going into these reviews. A lot of the problems I had in Season 1 do kind of fade out when we get into Season 2. While I can't fully forgive the soundtrack or the casting decisions for the dub, from a storytelling perspective, this series focuses on what it needs to focus on and gives us a much more well-received Fate Stay Night adaptation, in most people's eyes, than what we got from Dean. Even rewarding the hardcore fans by exploring aspects of the story and the lore we've never seen before, not even in the visual novel.
I don't have words to describe the impact that the Unlimited Blade Works route story has had on me. It's a story that handles the concept of survivor's guilt with emotional maturity, tells us to challenge your worldview, not to be ideologically closed-minded, and that if you love yourself and defeat your own insecurities, that nothing can stop you and you can overcome impossible odds, that your own biggest obstacle will always be your own persona and how you view yourself. Rin's fascination with Shiro comes not only from her silly childhood memory of when she first saw him, but also because of her servant dream sharing with Archer. She sees his fate and doesn't want that outcome for him. She loves his kindness and selflessness. But she also wants him to love himself and find a purpose in life that isn't just making others happy. Even Gen Orobochi remarked that he thought Shiro and Saber's relationship was not realistic or believable, and feels much more strongly about Rin.
The movie may not have aged super well, and people love to hate on it, but for me, it's still an essential part of introducing somebody into Fate for the first time, and I never skip it. Bottom line, even if other people don't like it, it's not going anywhere, and it's always going to be there for me to rewatch, even if it's just out of nostalgia. What a time it was to be a Fate fan when this series came out. You had all these brand new fans, plus people that started with zero, all coming out of the woodwork to show their appreciation for these classic characters like Shiro, Rin, and Archer, joining in the community and joining in with the cosplay. Me, having cosplayed Archer for 4 years straight at this point, was so thrilled to have such an obscure character go from obscure to mainstream. Over the course of Season 2's airing, Type Moon would go on to announce that they were rebooting the Fate Apocrypha video game project, but this time they were going to be doing it as an entirely different type of game. And in August of 2015, the newly titled Fate Grand Order would finally launch to Japanese audiences for iOS and Android. This would be the catalyst that would send Fate and Type Moon from being an obscure niche to straight into the mainstream. But the overwhelming and unprecedented rate at which Fate Grand Order's popularity would explode was beyond anything that of which any of us could have possibly anticipated. That does beg the question, though, is it any good? Well, it's controversial, to say the least. Until next time.